Hello, Caroline.
Should I sit here? Yeah.
Here is great. How are you today?
I'm good.
Enjoying the conference?
Yeah, very good.
Yes,
There's a lot
fantastic.
Of
First time at ChangeNOW?
First time as a speaker
As
and
a
exhibitor.
Speaker. Great. So Caroline is joining us from TerraTerre. By the way, great name, TerraTerre. So for the non-French speakers here, TerraTerre means grounded, down to earth, practical. So it's a great game on words. I don't know who came up with it, but it's a brilliant.
Our founder, yeah.
Very, very, very good. So tell us about you and tell us about TerraTerre, just to give the audience an idea.
Well, thank you for having me first. My name is Caroline. I'm head of partnerships at TerraTerre by Agoterra, which goes by the name of TerraTerre. And the idea behind TerraTerre is basically there's two observations that we made. The first observation is there's a crucial need to change the way we do agriculture. And the second observation is there are companies out there who want to contribute to that change, but they don't have a lot of alternatives when it comes to funding local, transparent, and tangible projects. So that's why we come up with TerraTerre, and the idea is to, and our mission is to accelerate the transition towards regenerative agriculture thanks to carbon finance and the engagement of companies that engage in serious climate strategies.
So you connect companies with projects
with farmers.
Of regenerative agriculture with farmers.
Absolutely. You have, on one side, farmers that engage in a 5-year project with a target. So it's not just, here are some practices, here are some techniques, we'll come back in 5 years and see how you've done. There's an actual follow-up. There's a target in terms of removal. So we store carbon in soils, but also reduction. Right? When you look at the carbon emissions in agriculture, there's not only CO2, there's methane, there's nitrous oxide, there's a bunch of things that need to be done. So those farmers are, are the protagonists, right? They take that risk to go into a 5-year project. And on the other side, you have the companies that fund these projects. And they bring financial support, financial incentive for farmers to change. But they also bring the technical support that these farmer needs to do that transition.
And is that financial support in the form of carbon credits, or is it?
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So we use the carbon. When I say carbon finance, we use carbon credits that are certified, either Label Bas Carbone, which is the French label, or Gold Standard, which is a more international label.
Okay. And Caroline, back to our narrative here and the beautiful documentary that we watched a bit of earlier on. How do you relate to that conversation? What did it do when you watched this, and how does it relate to TerraTerre?
Yeah, so I watched the documentary a few days ago, and I love the part where there's a lady that says, at the end of the day, we're the sun. Because the plants get their energy from the sun, the animals eat the plants, and then we eat the animals, or we eat the plants, and I thought that was very poetic. But I really relate with the fact that carbon is really vilified, and I make the parallel with plastic, because I used to work in plastics and recycling, and it was all about plastic is super bad, we need to eliminate plastic. It's the use of plastics that is an issue, not the plastic itself. Plastic can be good for a number of different things, and medical appliances and so on. So I think it's the same thing with carbon, and going back to what Axel was saying, it's all about the balance, right? And it's all about kind of restoring that balance that we kind of messed up at some point. So I can really relate to that. That's what we're trying to do at TerraTerre is carbon is a tool for farmers, right? It's super important for them to be able to grow stuff, right? So it's not the bad guy. It just needs to be in the right place and in the right amount.
Great. So earlier on, we talked about the decarbonization journey in the atmosphere.
Yeah.
Let's talk about agriculture and soils and maybe the food transition. Could you give us a sense of the scale of the task and
I can do that.
What do we have to do in the food transition space?
Yeah, so when we look at the full picture, food and agriculture is basically 25% of greenhouse gas emissions today. So, it's a daunting task. And within that, a vast majority is agriculture. And when you look at the breakdown, within agriculture, you have obviously everything that's to do with cattle, methane from the digestive process. You have crop production, not only carbon dioxide, but nitrous oxide that comes from fertilizers or chemical fertilizers. And then you have the soil, right? So too much tilling, for example, has degraded our soils and has emitted way more carbon than was intended, or at least that should. So that's the picture today. So the picture is quite, I mean, it's unequivocal, right? There's, the way we do agriculture, the way we do farming today does not work for us, does not work for the environment. And at some point, we need to, change the way that we do that. So that's what we're trying to do at TerraTerre, is really look at how we can change from a conventional farming to a regenerative agriculture. And if we wanted to give a definition to regenerative agriculture, is basically a system, a set of techniques that allow us to mitigate climate change, remove carbon, store them in the soil, reduce carbon emissions, enhance biodiversity, improve quality of water and air, but also produce food, right? At the end of the day, it's not only how can we do everything right for the environment, is we actually need to feed humanity, right? So I think those are the set of challenges that regenerative agriculture is trying to address. And there's a study, 4000, that's been created by a French institute called INRAE, which is also pretty unequivocal, and that says that it's the 4000 study. It says that if we increase the amount of carbon that's stored in our soils by 0.4%, we're able to store as much as humankind emits, right? I mean, it's a huge task, right? It's just 0.4%, but that means that all land should be managed in regenerative agriculture. But so there's a solution, right?
Well, here we go again. We have the solution. We know what to do. It's just a matter of doing it.
Yeah.
So in that regard,
why is it not happening?
Well, no, I'm not going to ask that question, but maybe let's go and talk about the farmers, because they're at the center of that. So what's happening in their lives and in their minds? What is their mindset? Do they know that they have to do this and they just don't know how? Do they not know about regenerative agriculture? What are you finding in this community?
Well, I think first, community of farmers, it can be quite heterogeneous, right? You have a small farmer in the Lot area in France with, 20 cows and, 20 sheep. I mean, it's not exactly the same type of farm that, you have when you have more of an intensive type of production. So I think there are different kind of farmers. The farmers that we work with obviously are kind of the early adopters, if you will, or people, really looking at changing the way they do farming. And I visited a farm just 3 days ago, so I'll take that example. It's two brothers, Messieurs Dumont, who have 60 milking cows and 60 hectares, so also growing cereals. And they're trying to do their job right. They're very, very proud of their jobs of being farmers. And I think that what struck me the most when I came there, spent 3 hours on the farm, is they want to do the right thing, right? They care about the animals. They care about how they do their job. They're just like every one of us, right? We like to do a good job. I mean, so I think that's the main point. And I think there are kind of 3 barriers that I see today in farmers not adopting those practices. The first one is financial. Some farmers do need that financial incentive to get going. They sometimes also need to invest in those new techniques. When it's cover crops, or when it's getting a new machine to prevent tilling, for example. So tilling really degrades the soil. So when you just do less tilling, it's just better for microfauna, biodiversity, but also better for storing carbon. And so that's the first thing. The second barrier is technical. Sometimes they're like, yeah, I'm going to change, but who's going to tell me what to do? What if I take on the wrong option? What if, I use this technique, but it doesn't work for me? So they need that technical support, and that's also what we bring them. It's not only about giving you the euros and the financial incentive, it's also about giving you the techniques and what works for your farm. So it's very personalized. And the third thing, I think, is psychological. Imagine yourself doing the same thing for 30, 40 years, and then somebody comes and tells you you're not doing the right thing, right? I don't think that's an easy task or an easy thing to change.
And who do you have to spend the most energy convincing? Is it the farmers, or is it the corporates, or is it government? Who is it? So everyone?
Yeah, a bit of everyone, I would say. I would say for farmers, we work with cooperatives, we work with chambers of agriculture, so we work with, on-ground communities that help us spread the word, and then when we work with a farmer that's kind of the leader of their communities, it's then easier to kind of spread that, that idea. Companies and corporates, difficult, because, and I relate back to what Axel was saying, it's all about reducing, which is the absolute priority, and I completely agree with that. But they tend to forget what IPCC says very clearly, which is if we don't remove carbon, we're never going to reach those objectives that we set ourselves collectively. So I think it's important to do both. And sometimes the contribution and the removing part just gets completely ignored and say, we'll see that later on. But first of all, nature doesn't wait. It's the albedo and kind of what we see with it's getting warmer, and so it's a virtuous, not virtuous, but vicious circle. It's getting warmer, so it releases more carbon, so it gets warmer, etc. And also, storing carbon in soils takes some time, right? Nature doesn't change from a day to another. Rome wasn't built in 3 days, so we need to anticipate, right? And 2050 is tomorrow, right? So I think that's the biggest hurdle for us, is creating that sense of urgency.
I recommend a partnership with Axel and Net Zero to more carbon.
We had a bit of a chat before that.
I'm sure you did. And I'm curious to hear about the journey from traditional farming to regenerative farming. If I'm a farmer and I decide I want to do that tomorrow, how long would it take me? What does it take?
So the first step for you as a farmer is to measure your carbon footprint. Just like any other company, you need to know where you're starting from. So we have a bunch of techniques to do that based on the type of agriculture. So you're measuring your carbon footprint. Based on that, you know where you can go. You set yourself a target in terms of ton of CO2. So it's a very concrete indicator of how well you'll be doing. And then once you have that target, say 1,000 tons of CO2 in 5 years, then you can select the different techniques that you're going to implement throughout the years to get to that target. So it can be installing cover crops. So in between 2 crops, you'll be plowing another crop, which will allow to store more carbon in the soils. And if you choose your crop correctly, it will also bring organic fertilizers. That means you reduce your chemical fertilizers, which means you also reduce the nitrous oxide. You can plant trees, you can plant hedges. That's also very beneficial for biodiversity. You can have a better herd management, so reducing your cattle because you're taking better care of your animals. So there's a bunch of techniques that you can use. And then at the end of the 5 years, during the 5 years, you obviously have support. We visit the farm every year to see that everything is going right. There's always a risk that the farmer will say, I wasn't able to do that, or that's too difficult for me. And that's also, we work with farmers and nature, so that's we have tools to mitigate that risk. And then we have an independent auditor that comes on the farm and that verifies the reductions and the removals that's been done for 5 years, and then that's what generates the carbon credits. So mind you, the companies that work with us actually fund the projects before they can get carbon credits, which is also shows the process in which they are, which is really contributing and not necessarily putting a line offsetting on their carbon footprint.
So what's in store for TerraTerre? How are you going to scale?
So, money? No. So today we're supporting 2,000 farmers throughout France. We're also starting to support farmers in Belgium and Germany. We're looking to expand throughout Western Europe, so the next countries will be Spain, Italy, and the UK. So that's really where we're going. We're trying to get as many farmers as possible in the process, which means that we also need to get a lot of corporates to follow us in that journey. And that's also my job.
And is that the more difficult end of the bargain?
Yeah, I would say if I had to choose, as I told you, creating that sense of urgency and showing that it is important to also contribute, to also fund projects that remove is a challenge. But I think we're getting there, and I think all of the people that we work with today really, they come from all kinds of different sectors, but what gathers them is that they want to fund local projects. We're all about proximity between the contributor and the farmer, and transparent projects. And we have a tool that allows them to see what's happening on the farm for the 5 years, the span of the project.
And we talked a bit about carbon credits before,
yes,
and the fact they've been vilified.
Yeah.
What's your take on carbon credits? How can we change the narrative around that as well as carbon?
Usually I see a bit of confusion between the UTS system, which is the compulsory system from the Kyoto Protocol in '98, which is basically I'm a factory, I have a right to emit X amount of tons. If I go above, I need to buy credits from other companies. If I go below, then I can sell my carbon credits. We're not in that space at all. We're on the voluntary carbon market. So we also call them carbon credits, but they're more like carbon certificates, if you will. So I think there's confusion in that, and I think it also goes back to how do you use those carbon credits, right? What are you doing with them? How do you communicate on that? In France, the claim carbon neutral is becoming forbidden to be used by companies, so that shows you a lot about, it's not the carbon credit itself, it's what you do and with it and how you communicate on it, but I think it's a great tool to steer funding towards meaningful and impactful projects.
Great. So we're coming to the end of this session. I'm going to, again, try to end on a positive note.
Yeah.
Are you optimistic about the future? Hopefully the answer is yes. And tell us why.
I am optimistic. I mean, it should be if I'm still in this space, otherwise just be doing something else. But I am optimistic, and what really gets me optimistic is, well, exactly the farm visits that I did, the farm visit that I did a few days ago, where I could see the farmer talking with the company that has nothing to do with farming, and see them exchanging on their challenges. And I think the key is, kind of creating that link, creating that space to talk about our challenges, understanding why farmers, do the things that they do, how we can help them transition. So I am optimistic. I just think, as Axel, I think we're on the same page, is how fast can we go? We always talk about acceleration. I want to see that acceleration happening, and I hope we'll get to see that.
Do you feel it in the air?
I feel it in the air. But
you feel it today, come on.
Yeah, no, I can feel it in the air for sure. I see, there are referentials. Label bas carbone is a super good referential. I mean, there are some things that need to be improved, but I think it helps a lot kind of get those stakeholders around the issue and get the right frameworks for us to do that. So that we do have things that show we're in the right direction.
Right, so we're coming to the end of this session. Maybe you can help me with parting advice or words for the audience.
I think I'd like to go back to restoring and regenerating, because we talk a lot about carbon, but there's a bunch of other indicators that tell us about the health or the non-health of our ecosystem, like biodiversity, quality of our water, quality of our air, amount of our water, how much water we use. And I think, going back to how we can protect what we have and regenerate and restore what we've damaged, I think is the way we should go.
Great. On that note, thank you
very
so
much
for joining us, Caroline.